Oh my gosh, look at that. So today we are going to talk about migratory birds. Hi everyone. A green marker. Wonderful. So this is going to be a little bit different from other animal chat times because when I was looking up migratory birds, there are so many of them. There is about 10,000 species of birds and 4,000 of them actually migrate. So I thought I could just name all of them, but that would be boring. We don't want to do that. So I thought I would just tell you about some really cool ways certain birds migrate, some kind of like neat facts to tell your friends. I do have to do a quick correction, because last week I told you there were 400 frogs in the world, and that was wildly untrue. There is 6,300 frogs in the world. I don't know where I got 400 from. Sometimes we make mistakes. That's okay. But we had a very excellent question asking where the most amount of frogs were, and it's in Ecuador. And in Ecuador, there is 1,500 different frogs. So when I said there are 400 frogs, there is even more frogs in Ecuador than even what I was telling you. So, you know, we learn and we figure out more updated lists and things like that. Another really cool thing about saying that there's 4,000 species of birds. There's actually more than that. We haven't discovered all the birds in the world, which again, I think is really cool because that means maybe you'll discover a bird when you're out doing some research in the in the tropics or the Arctic or all these other places that birds live. So we said before that, you know, bats and frogs live on every continent except for Antarctica. Well, birds live on every continent, including Antarctica, and they migrate from all the different continents. Not all birds migrate to the same area. We'll talk a little bit more about where they would go and why. There are there's lots of different types of migration. There is really close migration, but then there's long migration and longest migration. So why do birds migrate? The sort of scientific definition of migration is a seasonal movement from one region to another. So it's not like a bird is going from like one tree because its tree is like a little bit dirty, doesn't like it, wants to go to a nicer, prettier one. It's during 2 seasons a year, they go somewhere and then they come back from there, and it's a different region. Now, what does a region mean? We are going to talk about that when we talk about specific birds, because it makes it just a little bit easier to conceptualize where are they going, where are they coming back from. Now, the reasons that birds migrate typically is because of temperature and because of food. And so when birds are migrating, there's the longest migration and then there's long migration. So if birds are living in the northern hemisphere, there's 2 hemispheres, northern, southern. If they live in the northern hemisphere, the top of the sort of world, how we know it, it gets colder during autumn as it goes to winter. So they'll go down south. So some birds will go to the equator. So if they're birds that live in Europe, they'll go to like Central Africa. If they're birds in North America, they'll go to Central and South America. Some birds go all the way from the north all the way to the south. Arctic terns are really amazing birds. They go the furthest migration from any other bird in the world, and they go from Arctic regions all the way down to Antarctic regions in the autumn, and then in the spring, and then in the spring they come back again. But we'll talk more about that. Now, like I said, it gets colder. You know, if they think about like what winter looks like where everyone here lives, if you're a bird, typically don't want to be that cold, so you go somewhere a bit warmer because you like being warmer. But there's also less food. So if you are a hummingbird and you eat insects and nectar and things like that, as there's less and less flowers, there's less insects, to eat, then you're going to start to go, maybe I shouldn't be here anymore. I should go somewhere where there is a bit more, there's more flowers to eat. It's pretty interesting because hummingbirds will travel a little tiny bit south every single day where there is more and more flowers, and then one day they'll kind of get the switch in their brain that they'll go, oh, it's time to migrate, and they will just all fly south. They don't fly south in a group like we see with Canada geese and things like that, but they do migrate, and we'll talk more, and I'll show you some pictures of things like that. Oh, there's a little bird. Hi, little friend. And so it's pretty interesting. So hummingbirds, they're really, really little. They're little friends, and they migrate a huge amount. They do a lot of stopping and going. So they'll fly as much as they can in one day, then they'll have a little rest, and they'll have something to eat, and they'll fly again. But sometimes some of them will fly over the Gulf of Mexico, which, I'm just going to look this up, is 500 miles. It's 800 kilometers. And they do that in about 22 hours without stopping, which is pretty interesting for such a little tiny bird with little tiny wings to go all over the Gulf of Mexico. They could go all the way around on the different peninsulas there, but it just makes sense to do a straight shot down. Most birds, though, will do a bunch of different stops when they're going south or north, depending if they're going down south for winter or up north for summer. But it's pretty neat to think about, you know, big birds, little birds, we all want to go somewhere where it's comfortable, where there's more food. Oh yes, so we do know that some birds will travel in flocks. We've seen big rows, like big V's of Canada geese that are flying, but if you don't hang out in a flock during normal times, like Canada geese, if you are a solitary bird, like a rufous hummingbird or a ruby-throated hummingbird, typically, oh my gosh, that is an excellent bird picture. Very nice. Yeah, so typically, if you are a solitary bird, you don't really fly as a group. You just go, it's about time to migrate. And you start migrating south or north, depending on the season. So migration, we often talk about migration in the fall because we see so many species traveling at the same time. It starts to get cold and they start going south to where there's more food. But all those birds have to come back. So in springtime, there's also quite a big migration. All birds kind of fly at different times and they have different indicators on when they fly. But you normally see really big groups of birds in the winter because that's when suddenly it gets cold, there starts to be frost, there's less things to eat, and birds have to go, which is pretty neat. It does show us the changing of the seasons really nicely. So like I said, there's a rufous hummingbird. It is about 3 inches long. It is 7 centimeters. So it's a pretty little bird. It's a little tiny hummingbird. Now it has the longest migratory route in the world based on its size. So it goes 3,900 miles, which is 2,676 kilometers. You'll see I'm reading a lot to this animal chat time because I can't keep all these numbers in my head, and I wanted to make sure I gave you the correct numbers. So 2,676 kilometers. So that's not the largest migratory tract of a migratory bird, but it's the biggest based on its size. So that is about 78.4 million body lengths of a rufous hummingbird. So if you had 78.4 million rufous hummingbirds and you like line them up, that's how far it has to go which is pretty cool. They go from North America, up in Canada, all the way down to Mexico. So it's pretty far, pretty interesting. The Arctic tern, which we will talk about, we have some pictures of, they have the largest migration in the whole world. They go from Arctic regions to the Antarctic. So they get to see narwhals up in the Arctic, and they go all the way down to the Antarctic and they see penguins. They are very well traveled. So their one-way journey is about 17,700 kilometers. So to conceptualize that, it's literally around the world from polar to polar. It's amazing, but they're just a bit bigger than the rufous hummingbird. So that means it's 52 million body lengths, which is kind of neat because it's a huge amount, but it's just a little bit less work than if you were a hummingbird. So there's 78.4 million hummingbirds in a row, and there's 52 million Arctic terns in a row, which is pretty neat. Now, a lot of people wanted to know how long it took for birds to migrate. And this depends totally on the bird, because some of them fly really, really high into the atmosphere and they get tailwinds. The wind helps them go a bit faster. Oh, that is an excellent bird that you have there. Amazing. Oh, and there's a Lego bird. Ah, this is so great. You guys are doing so good. But yeah, so how long does it take for a bird to get all the way down to Mexico or all the way down to the Arctic? It really does depend. Most birds, oh, excellent drawing. Most birds travel songbirds travel about 30 miles an hour. So that would take about 533 hours to get to their destination. If they are flying for 8 hours a day, because they have to do some eating, they have to do some talking with their friends, they have to do some sleeping, takes about 66 days for most songbirds to get to where they're going. This really depends. There are some birds that just like get up in the atmosphere and they go the whole way in one shot. There's some birds that like really take their time. That doesn't look like a bird, that looks like a pterodactyl, which is kind of like a bird. So it's pretty interesting. These birds work really hard to get to where they're going to. Now it's my favorite time, my second favorite time of animal chat time. My favorite time was talking to everyone, but talking about things we don't understand. So we know that birds migrate. We see it happening. We see that we can tag birds. We see that they're in the Arctic, now they're in Mexico, now they're here. What is going on? We don't actually know 100% how they migrate. We know that birds take a look at how much light is in the day, and when in the autumn, when there's less and less light, they go, ooh, it's a bit time to get down south. And we know that they use the sun and the stars as a compass, and we know that a lot of them can sense magnetic fields in the earth. We don't know exactly how that works in their brain. We know that most birds stay on the same migratory tract every year. They go the same way because they go, this way is safe, this way is nice. I recognize that tree, I recognize that stump and that rock. I'm going the right way. The stars look the same, but we don't know exactly what that means for them. And you know, they're sensing they're sensing magnetic fields, but we don't know exactly how they're sensing them. So it's pretty neat to think about. And it also means there's just more stuff we don't know about animals that we need to study a bit more, which I think is so cool. We can think even more about these little guys. We also found out that some birds use a sense of smell, like homing pigeons have a really excellent sense of smell, and they're able to smell their way home, which is something that just don't really think about with birds. So we know they do it. We don't really know how they do it, but it's pretty neat. Now there is one bird, I would be remiss to say, there's one bird that hibernates, which I totally learned. So some birds migrate, some birds stay around all year to the same area. We see a lot of birds in Central Africa and in Central America that just stay there. It's just really nice to live there. There's some birds that stay all around in the UK and in Canada and in different places in America. But there's one that just has a good old sleep, and it is called the common portwheel, and it lives in the UK. And so they actually hibernate, which is really interesting. They have like a lot of really big meals, and then they find a little area, cave kind of, to sleep in, and then just like bats and some frogs, they just have like a good old sleep for a while when it gets really cold. So that's pretty neat. A lot of birds, when it gets really cold, go into something called torpor, which is kind of like hibernation, but it's not as long as hibernation. So they'll go into torpor at nighttime, and it just means that they're using less energy. And so hummingbirds and birds that need to have a lot of energy because they're flying so many body lengths down south and then up north again, at nighttime will sort of shut down their body a little bit, like they're going into a mini hibernation. Like I said, Canada geese will use tailwinds, which is pretty neat because Canada goose can fly about 40 miles, 64 kilometers an hour, but with a tailwind, if the wind is pushing them down south or north, depending on the way they're going, they can fly 70 miles or 112 kilometers an hour, which is so neat to think about, that they're just flying and then they get like a good gush of wind and they go, whew, all right, no more energy for me, which is nice. Now, Canada geese migrate in, I was gonna say packs, it's called a flock. They travel in flocks, and they're the ones that you see the big V's. And the reason that they fly in these V's is because they wanna be more aerodynamic. So the one in front cuts down some of the wind that you're getting on your face, and then the one behind has a little bit less wind, and the one beside even less wind. So they have to do less flippity flopping when they're going south or north. Now, the one in front doesn't stay in front forever. They are very fair in Canada goose flocks. And the one in front that's breaking all the wind will go to the back and get a rest, and then they'll continue to sort of move around. So sometimes when you see Canada geese, they're not in a V, they're kind of like figuring it out. That's generally because the one in the front was like, I have worked very hard, I just need a little bit of a break. Someone else has to help me with this. Some Canada geese will only migrate 3,000 miles or 5,000 kilometers, but they can fly about 2,000 miles or 3,000 kilometers in a day. So sometimes Canada geese, their migration is just 2 days. Sometimes it's way longer, but if they can fly that long, if they have really good weather, they can fly that whole way. Sometimes they do have to hunker down, and it takes them a couple days to fly again, but if they have the best weather, they are good to go. Now, like I said, the longest migration in the whole world is an Arctic tern. They are about 85 centimeters, their wingspan, little wingspan birds, which is about 33 inches. And they fly 50,000 miles or 80,000 kilometers in a whole year. So a really neat thing about that is they can live to be about 30 years old. And so in their lifetime, that is 3 trips to the moon and back. That is how much they fly. So they lay their eggs up in the Northern Hemisphere, up by the Arctic, and then they fly all the way to the Antarctic for winter, for their winter, which in the Antarctic is summer, and they do a lot of eating down there. So even though they live in the Arctic and the Antarctic, they wonderfully always have summer, which is pretty nice. The shortest migration, and then I'm going to show you some pictures. The shortest migration is actually the blue grouse, which lives on Vancouver Island and in British Columbia. It is 300 meters, and that's it. It's as far as most of you can run very, very fast, which is about 948 feet. Now, what they do is they kind of like amble on the ground, and they go from the alpine above the tree line down into the trees. So in the summer, they live in the alpine, they live in grasslands, they eat all kinds of delicious grass seeds. And in the summer, or in the winter, when it gets too cold, they go down to the tree line and they eat conifer seeds and things like that. And they get protected from all the snow. So it's pretty neat. So you think about like these birds that fly all the way around the world, that's migration. And you think about birds that walk down from the alpine grasses to some old growth trees, that's migration, which is pretty neat. So this is a Canada goose. A lot of us have seen them before, and this is the pattern that they fly in that that iconic V. They are from North America. All the Canada geese that you see in Europe and the UK are actually were actually brought there. So they're not supposed to be there, which is why a lot of them won't migrate, because it's pretty comfortable for them. They think, you know what, it's not that cold. We have a lot of food. We're good. We're not going to migrate. It's only when they're up in really cold climates that they decide to migrate. These are some puffins. They are, this is taken in northern England, and they share nesting areas with these Arctic terns. So these Arctic terns, this is the little babies. They look like tiny little rocks, so bigger animals don't try to eat them. They are these little guys that fly all the way from the north all the way to the south. They are also very territorial because they fly so far. They do such a big job at flying around the world. If you get too close to their nests, they will try to attack you. And you can see in this picture, one of the members of Animal Chat Time right now was actually swooped on by an Arctic tern.
Me.
No, this is. Yes, he was. That's him running away from an Arctic tern. And so this is how far Arctic terns go. You can see the red at the very top is where all their nesting grounds are. And then the blue is, so that's where they spend summertime, spring and summer in the Northern Hemisphere. And then once it starts to get cold, they go, nope, thank you. And they go all the way south. And so when it is winter time for the Northern Hemisphere, it's summer for the Southern Hemisphere. So they get to forever summer for them, which is very nice. Now, these are little hummingbirds. These are not rufous hummingbirds, and that is a picture of me looking adoringly at the hummingbirds. Now, these hummingbirds, this is some pictures from Costa Rica, and you can see how beautiful they are and how little they are. And they, you know, think about the 78 million body lengths that they fly, just so they can you know, get some more food. Now, the reason they don't stay in Central America the whole time is because in the spring there are tons of birds and tons of insects and tons of other things, and there's a lot of competition. So instead of competing with all the flowers and all the lizards and frogs and everything else, they just come back to Canada, back to North America, where there's less competition. Makes it a bit easier for them. And this is a blue grouse. This is a little guy, a little sturdy bird that goes 300 meters from the alpine, so this little grass area, and then they live in pine trees and conifer trees. So it's really neat. You know, migration looks very different for all animals, which is pretty cool. And all these little guys look. So we are almost out of time, but I can see that there are some questions maybe. What do birds eat? Yeah, that's a good question. So a lot of birds, before they go on their migratory trips, will get kind of fat. They'll really load up on calories because some birds don't eat when they're migrating. Some do, but all of them need to have a lot of energy. So some birds will get lots more grubs and insects and have a lot of nectar. Some birds will have like little fish and things like that, but they'll get quite chunky because they want to have all that energy, which is really good. What are the biggest flocks? Excellent question. So some flocks can be massive. Like I said, hummingbirds don't travel in flocks, but sometimes when they go over water, they're known to have a few hundred of them traveling together just because it's a bit easier for them to travel. But really big flocks of Canada geese can sometimes travel of a few hundred, sorry. And sometimes Arctic terns will have a few hundred and sometimes even bigger. Birch has a question.
Okay, go ahead. Do blue jays migrate?
Oh, that's a very good question. So blue jays typically don't migrate. They are really hardy birds, and the cold doesn't really bother them that much. And so they will sometimes migrate just a little bit from where it's cold down to area like the blue grouse. They'll go from a sort of more open area to old growth forests that have just a little bit more protection for them. But they stay kind of all year round. Same with cardinals, which is why up in Canada, you'll see a lot of cardinals that are around in the wintertime. They're super red and you can see them. Just, oh, a cardinal right there. Excellent. That has worked out wonderfully. And a blue jay, wonderful. Oh, so good. Oh, and there is another question. You have your hand up.
Why are some birds really big and why are some migratory birds really small?
Yeah, well, I think that there's huge diversity in birds because birds are just like a huge group. So there's some that are big just because they're big and some that are small. But the reason that they decided to migrate, you know, a long time ago was looking at what type of food was around. So if you look at a Canada goose, they're quite big. They sometimes can have a wingspan of 5 feet, which is almost as big as a Livingstone's flying fox, if we remember. So they eat a lot of grasses and a lot of reeds and things like that. So they can get really big. And when it's winter, they can no longer find those and they go south. But then if you look at a hummingbird that eats little insects and nectar and things like that, they're small. They still migrate, but they migrate for the exact same reason. There's less food in the autumn and the winter. So it's a really good question. It doesn't matter so much that the bird is big or small. It just matters how much food they have around. Oh, so someone asked about finding bird banding data online. That is difficult to say for me. So that's really regional. If you Google that, or you Google like your area and look up citizen science or migratory bird counts or backyard bird counts, that will help you get more data. There is tons of citizen science programs out there that's either banding the actual birds through universities and through research programs, and then there's some that don't band birds anymore. They just do backyard bird counts. So you look outside and you're like, there's a rufous hummingbird, they're back now. And so we're able to track them just by people looking outside, which is pretty cool. But finding the data is really regional. I know Nature Canada does it. BBC Spring Watch in the UK does a really good job at showing off all the different birds that are banded. But yeah, just kind of take a look around in your area, which is pretty neat.